Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of our lean-in sessions this week. As always, I'm Michael Linke, and on behalf of the Australian Institute of Architects, it's really great to have you with me yet again. Today's lean-in looks at the more intricate professional responsibilities we need to ensure when working with architects and photographers across our spectrum, and in an ever-increasing desire for visual recognition across different social media channels and other media channels, architects can often overlook their responsibilities when it comes to working with intellectual property. So in today's lean-in session, we're really excited to have architectural photographer Scott Burrows joining us. And so Scott is going to share some of his thoughts and some of his experiences around making sure that when clients commission architectural photography, that they understand their legal responsibilities, that they understand their brand protection and their own clients' privacy considerations as well. A little bit about Scott. Scott's a specialist architecture and a specialist interiors photographer. He's practiced for the last 2 decades, and he's really experienced some of the architectural profession's biggest milestones. I suppose the biggest one really is the traditional sort of transition from traditional film elements through to digital capture, and now going into this very quickly evolving world of social media. But throughout his career, Scott has worked nationally, he's worked internationally, and he's shot a vast array of project types, from anything from sporting stadiums through to commercial developments and through to, some of the smallest residential and retail spaces. And we're really thrilled that he joins me now. Scott, how are you today?
Michael, I'm well. Thanks very much for having me.
Great. Absolute pleasure to have you. It's going to be a fascinating session. And I will say to those, I will say to those of you who are watching, this session will be recorded. And of course, if you do miss anything or if you come late, the session will be recorded and available on our dedicated COVID-19 website page later on this afternoon. Scott, I'm going to hand it over to you. That's it from me. I'll come in at the end with Q&A. Don't forget, for those of you who are watching, that the chat box is your friend. So if you have any questions or comments for Scott, pop them in there and I'll go through them at the end of the session. Scott, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Just want to say hello to everyone who's joined us today. I'm hoping that you find today's session informative. And I hope I don't bore you too much over the next half an hour, 45 minutes. But hopefully today we can all go away with with a refresh on where things are at and what we should be doing, and go from there. So as Michael said, today's talk's all about photography, copyright, and the use of that. All of my clients use my images for a lot of different purposes out there: marketing, socials, media, publishing, all that sort of stuff. There's just a few items of housekeeping that I sort of want to get out of the way first before we dive right into things. Today's session's just all about education and awareness. That's the big thing that I want to get out of this. I just want to refresh everyone's memories about certain things, make them aware about some of their responsibilities. I also want to discuss photography and copyright just in a very general sense only. There's so many permutations and combinations of scenarios out there that it really is difficult to try and cover all aspects in today's discussion. But hopefully what it'll do is it'll start to get you to think a little bit more specifically about how protected material is being used by your company, and also how that protected material is actually being used by the staff within that company as well. I also want to point out that each professional photographer out there working, they have their own individual methods of determining usage rights around their photography. I'm only going to discuss some what I would call sort of more general approaches that photographers might use in the marketplace, and I'll probably also make reference to some of the ones that I specifically use with my clients as well. And lastly, the big one, if you need to understand a little bit more about some of the aspects that I bring up to today, and how they actually impact you directly, then you should probably go and actually seek the advice of a legal practitioner. So let's get right into things. In an age where digital imagery it's so easily obtained, copied, and distributed, I think it's slowly becoming apparent that the net worth of a single image and how it is actually used out there is now being overlooked. There's many companies and individuals, they've forgotten about the specific laws that are in place to protect the unlawful use and commercialization of imagery. These laws, they're not new, and as creative professionals, we're required to actually understand how these laws work in relation to the businesses that we run and the individuals who are associated within those businesses. The digital visual environment, it's got such an insatiable appetite for imagery that needs to be fed no matter what the consequences. And in turn, I think this has slowly fostered a culture of use at all costs, apologize later, and then move on to someone else who will not interrupt their march forward. And me personally, I think it's a very dangerous attitude to have when we're using copyrighted material out there for commercial or business purposes. So here's a few topics that I want to discuss today. I just want to, hopefully it's sort of in a chronological order that it'll build up a whole story at the end for you, but I sort of want to briefly touch on photography copyright in Australia as it currently stands. I want to look at copyright and licensing with a photographer. You know, why should copyright be controlled? How can you actually use a particular photograph? And then I want to have a look at some instances which I think are quite relevant to everyone out there now, such as how that copyright material is being used in social media, how businesses are using it during awards processes, and then also any other sort of media sources. And then hopefully at the end, if everyone's sort of still awake, we've got some time. Happy to answer some questions. So look, let's get right into it. So photography copyright in Australia. Copyright in Australia is automatically applied to any photographic work that is created. And this has actually been in place and is still in place since 1968. There's been a few amendments along the way to sort of keep current with various changes, but essentially the Copyright Act is still there to protect the creative interests of various individuals. You don't need to register your work to be covered in Australia. It's automatic. So if you create something of original nature, it is protected. Copyright protects a photographer's investment in time. It protects their investment in the equipment that they've purchased to produce their work, their talent gained, and the material that they ultimately produce. And copyright, it also allows photographers to control how their content is used. So in general terms, if you want to copy or share someone else's images, you are likely to require permission or obtain a license from the original copyright holder, unless of course the copyright has expired, and I won't go into that because there's a whole heap of different rules around that, or there is an exemption around the actual licensing of that particular body of work. So that's just a general rundown on copyright. Then I want to sort of look at the differencing between copyright and licensing. So a client, an architectural client, for instance, we'll keep this very specific here. You know, you commission a photographer and you pay him or her to go out and create a set of images around the project that you have completed. Now, at the end of the day, you are not the copyright holder of those images. That still remains with the photographer. So a photographer will generally have in their terms and conditions a definition as to what you can and can't do with that imagery. And in most cases, a photographer will license or assign rights to a particular client in how they use that material. And so that's the difference between copyright and licensing. Assigning rights or licensing, it means that someone can use that material under a certain set of terms. but they do not have ownership of that material, and nor do they have a say in how it is used. That still lies with the photographer. So there's two types of licensing out there that you will generally see used by photographers. There's non-exclusive and then there's exclusive. So in most cases, photographers will run a non-exclusive license. Probably 98% of my work that I do for architects will be of a non-exclusive nature. And what this means is it simply is that the photographer may continue to use the images and pass on additional licensing of those images to other third parties not associated with the original commission. You know, that's how photographers make a living. The only way that we can pay the taxman at the end of every year is to actually sell imagery. In some cases, photographer can also provide an exclusive license. And that means that the client has the total right to commercialize those images to the exclusion of all others, including the photographer. And this normally comes at a greater cost than a non-exclusive license, because the photographer's also got to factor in any future earning losses that he or she may gain from than if it was for a non-exclusive situation. The copyright still remains with the photographer, but they've basically said to the exclusive client, the images are yours. You have total control over how you want them, where they're seen, and things like that. That's just a very general term. There's a whole heap of different subclauses that you may want to put in T's and C's later on. But as mentioned at the start of this conversation, excuse me, each photographer has their own different ways of working with licensing. And as professionals, I think it's really important to have that conversation with your photographer and understand how they license their work and how it may benefit you to massage sort of their own terms and conditions around, so that it will help benefit the marketing and the brand strength of the business that you're running. The next topic that I sort of want to jump into is well, why should copyright and photography be controlled? So you've commissioned a photographer and they've taken the work, and they've provided you with a beautiful set of imagery files of your particular project. And so the next best thing is, well, okay, let's get all these photographs out there as much as possible for all to see and enjoy. And so similar to architects and design professionals who are commissioned to produce creative solutions and tangible results, such as plans, sketches, written documents, specifications, and the like. Well, photographers are working the same way. They have the right to control the work produced for a client, and they have the right to increase their remuneration opportunities. But if material is willy-nilly dispersed out there without any control whatsoever, then that work becomes devalued. And in turn, their client's work is also brought along on that devaluating journey. Obviously, the more and more it's seen out there, I think the less and less people are willing to sort of connect with it. So experienced photographers understand this, and they understand that their clients have invested a lot of time and a lot of money into building their own business brands, and they have very strategic key marketing directions that they want to go in. But I mean, if these photos are actually starting to leak out into the marketplace, and other consultants and people as part of that particular project, or other areas that aren't even associated with it at all, get their hands on images and start using that material out there in different areas and stuff like that, then I truly believe that brand is going to be slowly watered down, and the whole intent and the whole process of it will be lost. And so an experienced photographer, through appropriate licensing, will be able to make sure that the terms and conditions in that licensing complements their own clients' business interests, and they form a key and strong role in the types of marketing and that brand strength that I was alluding to before. I think it's also important to mention this as well, is that it's important to control the use of images as well for the client's own clients. There's been many occasions in my career where an architect's own project is subject to a whole manner of things, such as privacy or release date clauses, and these have to be respected. And as a working photographer, I have a professional and a vested interest in making sure that my client's own interests are actually protected through that licensing and that control of imagery. I know we all sort of jump at the bit and say, oh, okay, let's get it out there. I really don't care how much it's seen or shared. Let's just do it. I think that's probably the most dangerous way to curate a marketing approach to your work. If this material is freely distributed, and those out there who've got their hands on it that aren't licensed or have permission to use that material, if they're not respecting or understanding all of this background work that's gone into things, then this whole process will have a detrimental effect, I believe, to that architectural firm or the individuals within it. And it can also impact too on the future relationship that you have with your client associated with that project as well. I'll say, look, photographers don't want to lock up images. You know, they want to see beautiful stuff out there as much as everyone else, but they want their clients' work they want their clients' work to be seen by all, but they want to make sure that it's actually used correctly and purposely in the way that actually complements the client's direction that they've put in place. Simply that, other than simply just populating an oversaturated marketplace where someone will look at it and go, great, swipe, let's look at the next one. So as we move through this journey, I'll just want to touch upon, well, how can a photograph be used? I love the following quote by Sarah Hawkins. Back in 2011, she was a social media examiner, and she started to look at the whole sort of movement around social media. And she came up with a quote, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But when that picture is used and is copyright protected, then those 1,000 words turn into 3 words: cease and desist. And so the best way to check to see if you can actually use a photograph for a designated purpose is to ask the following 2 questions. So the first question is, do you own the copyright, or have you been assigned the correct licensing use for that particular image? This is generally found in the T's and C's of the photographer's contract that you work with. If the answer is yes to that, then fine, go right ahead, use the image as you've been allowed to. The second question is that if you don't fall under the correct licensing use or have been given permission, then are you undertaking fair use of that image? So I've mentioned a term there called fair use. So what is fair use? And this is not to be read as free use. A copyrighted photograph falls under fair use as long as a few guidelines are followed. There are no exceptions or excuses for using copyrighted material just because you think it's fair use or you're not making a profit from it. The Australian Copyright Act actually spells out a full definition of what constitutes fair use, and you can read that on their website. But in general terms, fair use of copyrighted material falls under some of the following categories: images for research, study or education, criticism or review, parody or satire, reporting the news, professional advice from a legal practitioner. So keep in mind those 2 questions when you start to use copyrighted material, and that will start to develop this awareness around, am I using this correctly? Or if not, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm not putting both the business and individuals in harm's way later on down the track? So this leads us to the next section about actual environments of where all of this copyrighted material is being used. There's we're all familiar with them, that there's the various social media platforms, the online platforms, websites, industry awards, publications, whether again they're electronic or print. I've given a whole range of talks around this to various architectural offices over the last 12 to 18 months, and I posed a series of questions, and I can't see anyone, but you can all play along if you like, because I thought that this was quite a nice way to sort of ease into this. So I said to each of the groups, I said, so hands up those who have a business or commercial social media account, not to be confused with a personal account. And so obviously, everyone in the room puts a hand up, and then I asked them, well, keep your hand up if you regularly use images on this business or commercial account that makes reference also back to your business and commercial interests. And a lot of them still kept their hands up. And then I said, keep your hand up if you actually ask permission from the owner of that copyrighted material if you don't already own the rights or have licensing permission. And a lot of them started to drop their hands. And then I said, keep your hand up if you allowed your post with that copyrighted material that you didn't ask permission for in the first place. Keep it up if you actually allowed that then to be reposted and copied by someone else's business or commercial accounts out there for the same purposes of what you've just done. And a lot of people again put their hand down. And then lastly, I said, keep your hand up if you checked the little box at the bottom that says, I agree to all the terms and conditions before I open up this account. And I can guarantee every single person dropped their hand. And so that sort of leads us into the next part of using copyrighted material in the media is social media accounts. It's a very, very hot topic. And so a large majority of businesses will rely on some form of social media, published presence or awards to promote their own professional brands and services. So brand strength and integrity is important in maintaining a professional business. As I alluded to before, organizations spend a huge amount of time and money making sure that their marketing strategies are developed and implemented correctly. But unfortunately, this can all be done within just one single action. So again, it's prudent to mention that each photographer has a different way of how they want their clients to handle material within all of these environments that we'll talk about. So you need to check that with the individual person that you look at. But let's take a look at some of the following examples and scenarios around social media and other media uses. I want to have a look at Instagram and its terms of use. I want to also get you to sort of understand the terms around entering copyrighted material into awards processes, and also what happens to images that are published by other organizations and things like that. Keep in mind the following too, that a lot of external organizations such as Instagram, Facebook, awards, industries, all that sort of stuff, they put terms and conditions in there to deflect any responsibility away from themselves and place it all back on the person that's actually submitting the material. So at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to make sure that the material that you're using and putting forward on your and your business's behalf is actually legally able to do so. So Instagram, before you hit the little button down the bottom that says you want to post it, you've created this and curated this beautiful post. There's a magical image on it. There's a fantastic story underneath it. But are you fully aware of Instagram's terms and conditions when you are submitting material on their actual site. So in summary, Instagram states that you can only post content on Instagram that doesn't violate someone else's intellectual property or copyright attributes. And the best way to achieve this is to use material that you have created yourself. If you're the originator of everything that you do on your posts, you are home and hosed, you are protected. It also states that it's possible to infringe someone else's copyright, even if you actually gave credit to that person within your post. If you don't, then you're also possibly infringing their moral rights as well. And I'm not going to even start to get into the moral rights aspects of this, because it's a completely different subject again. It's also possible to infringe someone else's copyright, even if you've actually included a disclaimer in there stating that you did not mean to infringe someone else's copyright. If you didn't intend to profit or create a commercial or any commercial leverage from it. You can infringe someone's copyright if you found the work on the internet or copied it from someone else's website. You can infringe someone else's copyright if you saw that someone else has actually posted it first and thought that, oh, okay, it's okay for me to then use that. Or if you think it comes under fair use that I alluded to before. So there's 3 golden rules that Instagram put out there to make sure that you cover yourself in the correct use of material. The first one is, did I create all the content in the post myself? If you have, then you should be fine. Do I have permission or licensing from material that I'm using from a third-party source? If you do, then you should be fine. And does my post constitute fair use? So if you keep those 3 things in mind, then you'll go a long way to actually protecting yourself when you start to use copyrighted material out there. So let's have a look at some Instagram post examples. These are all variations of what I'm subjected to as a photographer out there in my day-to-day activities. I couldn't put all the variations of what happens there because there's just so many of them, and it would take us a couple of days. But look, a really good example of an Instagram post is basically, let me just get this here. There, hopefully everyone can see that. That we've posted an image. You own the copyright, or you've been given the licensing ability to use that image in social media environments, and you've made appropriate credits where credits are due. Copyrighted material, you don't necessarily need to if you're the actual copyright owner of it, but I think it's just professional courtesy to acknowledge the other people that have worked with you in association with that. Keeping in mind that that does not give you the permission to then use that material just because you've been credited. So this is a fairly, a standard, a good example. I'll show you a bad example of a Instagram post. So the Awesome Engineers company that actually worked on this particular project, but didn't spend a cent in any of the photography on the job, saw this post that I'd thrown up and thought, well, okay, we'll repost that because we worked on that job and we can get some leverage from here, and everything will be happy as Larry. And so what they've done is they've reposted it, and then all they've done is they've just patted themselves on the back and then self-promoted themselves in that particular feed with the intent to actually have market leverage or commercialization of that particular message. And that's something that you've got to be very, very careful of, in my opinion, is the actual wording and how you are are using that in a post. Yes, they've included the credits down the bottom, thinking that, oh well, as long as I credit someone, then we should be, okay to go. But as I said to you before, just because you credit someone doesn't actually also mean that you have been given the okay to use that particular material. The other thing that I get really annoyed about in some of these instances as well is that the original commissioning client has spent a lot of money on the photography. And by people that are actually reposting, they're taking advantage of those people that do the right thing and actually want to create great photography of their projects, and in effect are paying for these persons' marketing as well. And the final one, which is a really, I've had this on numerous occasions of late, is that the people that were associated again with this particular project, and in this instance, the Awesome Homewares people that were responsible for all of the interior styling and furnishing of it, saw it and thought, great, we'll actually copy that photo. They haven't reposted it. They've effectively done a screenshot and then dropped it into their own post. You can see here that they've given a thanks to the architects who had them along on the journey. There's no credit to the photographer, which violates copyright, moral rights, and anything else that you want to put in there. But then they go the step further and actually then start to use that copyrighted material as a selling point as well. So when you can click on the post and all of these little highlight things come up about all the things that they provide, how much you can buy them for. Here's a link to our shop and website and stuff if you want to come in and buy it. So they are effectively directly using copyrighted material illegally in trying to further their commercial interests. So they're just some general scenarios that you need to think about. But I think at the end of the day, it's how you how you curate your social media posts and how you use that information in there that is so important, because this now all comes under how copyright and intellectual property material is used in a business and commercial sense. Let me just come out here. Awards and is a very tricky one. It's a very challenging area when it comes to copyrighted material. A large majority of awards terms and conditions, and I've read just about every single one of them out there relating to the architectural industries. Some of them actually mention the following in their terms, and a lot of this is actually quoted verbatim from terms, but some of it says that all material being entered permits the awards organisation organisers to use the material for any media or advertising purposes, but not limited to online, print or screen. Any material that you submit must not be copyrighted to any third parties. Any material submitted allows the awards organisers and any other third party sponsors access to that material for promotion of their own interests. And so I get a lot of these terms and conditions sent to me, and there's normally something in there that says a photographer's statement needs to sign this, and the statement says, I own copyright of the images and grant permission for the awards organisation to use the images for marketing, as well as giving external providers, including but not limited to audiovisual companies and other official publishers, permission to reproduce the copyrighted materials herein. There's been numerous instances in the last 12 months whereby a lot of architectural companies haven't fully understood what they're entering material into. Essentially, you don't have the right to pass on copyright to someone else if you don't have copyright ownership in the first place. And yet a lot of these terms and conditions are actually asking for full use of all of these materials that you provide to us as part of your entry. And so it's very important for a lot of the staff in the offices to fully understand the legal ramifications of passing on copyrighted material for when you're entering into awards. And that's the same with things like sketches, renders, drawings and stuff that are created from within your office also. I've had some very, very curly situations where this has basically gotten out of hand. And it gets back to before, as I was talking about, trying to protect a client's brand, their own client's brand, their privacy, and things like that. But once it gets into the general media streams, and then it gets passed on and on and on to sponsors and their own media teams, and it can get totally dispersed. And then we have awards popping up that are being used in inappropriate circumstances, jeopardizing the work done for branding and marketing of an architectural firm, putting at risk the privacy of any of the project owners, particularly residential work. So you can see that it's an extremely important aspect to fully understand when submitting material into awards processes, just how that material is going to be used out there, and have very strict controls on it. There's other media sources as well, and these include, as I said before, online forums, online publications, books and magazines, and they also have a terms and conditions section as well. So again, it's very important for individuals and businesses to read those and to make sure that the work that you're putting in there on behalf of that has been created by your photographer, it's being used in the proper way and not being disrespected or illegally used. So just a final word. Hopefully everyone's still awake, but I just want to recap. So copyright, it's a law that's been established in Australia to help protect your own creative rights, and those rights of professionals who you surround yourselves with. Photographers also enjoy these protective rights. Imagery is important in establishing your brand and your marketing. But by diluting this material out there through a lack of understanding and a lack of media control, you run the risk of exposing your own organisation and all of the staff that work there as well. Look, this whole chat session, it was purely dedicated towards sort of raising the awareness again around copyright and media control, and it's not meant as a source of legal advice. As I said, each and every one of you have got different circumstances, so you probably need to open those conversations up again. But it's very easy to forget about a few things in our busy worlds. And I'd also implore everyone out there as well to understand where photographers are coming from as well. The clients that I work with, they commission me and they work with me because they want to complement and enhance our brands together. And it's my job to also protect all of their hard work that they've been doing through the controls that I place on that material as well. And again, it really just comes down to having an open, frank discussion with the people that you get your imagery created from, and work out a best way forward in making sure that everyone's goals and aspirations are all moving in the right direction. And one other big thing is that I think it's really important to understand is to get your staff who are responsible for all of the socials, the marketing, or the day-to-day submission of material out there, get them to understand what it is that they're committing to when they actually submit that material to various organizations or online environments and stuff like that. Their job is not necessarily to also market, but they also have a legal responsibility to have this understanding so that it's not actually undermining any of the things that your own studio or business is trying to achieve. And the really big thing is that, ignorance, it's not deemed an excuse in a legal situation. It's you can say sorry as much as you want, but unfortunately, I'd hate to see people use material and then find out later down the track that they've been just getting themselves into more and more problems. And a simple case of sorry sometimes is just not going to be enough when someone can actually exercise their rights to the material that they've produced, and that goes for architects as well. So I think that's it. I've got some source material here as well. These are all just websites that you can find online. You can see all the various social media platforms, copyright rules. They've all got them. They're all there for interesting reads in this time of COVID and lockdown, where we've all got extra time on our hands. So it's interesting to have a read through them and familiarize yourself with them to make sure that the content that you're creating and putting out there is safe and working effectively for everyone. So I think that's it, Michael. Hopefully there's some questions. Or I'll do my best to answer them anyway if I can. And if not, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me at lunchtime and having a general chat about this very tricky subject that can pose a challenge for us, I think.
Scott, you don't get away that easy. You've had a lot of questions.
Oh, I know. I sort of figured that would be the case.
You've been very popular indeed. So thanks very much for that presentation. It was great to have you take us through that. That's a really interesting session and I've learned quite a number of different things. I've scribbled out some of my own questions and we've got a lot of questions from members. So let's kick off. First of all, the strangest place you've ever seen some of your imagery appear?
Oh, I wouldn't say strange, because most of my images are still related around the architecture industry and the development industry. So I haven't had any sort of really weird situations where they've popped up, such as a billboard or something that's not aligned to the architectural industry that I'm sort of knock around in. I have had some images used that have had some very interesting results in terms of legalities coming back the other way. Nothing to do with myself, but unfortunately, yeah, some of the images that we used in environments, the people had the credentials to really, have a good go at making sure everyone's knuckles were wrapped.
How do you continually assess? I mean, it's a beast chasing people that download imagery off your Insta and whatever else it might be. I mean, how much of the day do you spend? Do you dedicate a certain period of time to sort of reverse Google image searching for your content, or does it just come to you when people say, "Hey, Scotty, I've just seen your content has ended up on a website in Bangkok"? What do you do?
Yeah. Oh, look. I mean, I'm not sort of the type of person that's just going to quickly pen a cease and desist and send it straight away. I'm Australia, as you were alluding to before this talk, Michael, that we're not a litigious society, and it's about education and awareness. And most of the time, having been in this for close to 20 years, I tend to know who's using and who's not using, or where to look and where not to look in terms of finding stuff. And sometimes I'll actually have clients, send me a message and say, "Scott, look, I've just seen it here. Did you give that to them?" And I'll chase it up. A lot of the times I'll just inadvertently see it through, various sort of scrolling online, websites, whatever. I don't actively spend a lot of time doing it. And I'm sure that a lot of it's slipped through the nets. But that's sort of what I touched upon before in the talk about making sure that I align myself to clients who also have that, that reverse professional respect in terms of another creative producing work, and making sure that everyone's, copyrighted material is protected and is used the right way, because I think it can just benefit from all of us and help increase the net worth in our work, not dilute it and just devalue it.
What about image manipulation? So this has been asked by a number of people.
Yep,
So
yep.
Leslie talked about, what about, if a photograph is taken of your photograph, and Hamish has just come through on the quote, and Hamish says, look, what if there's quite an amount of manipulation on the photograph, and I have seen it myself where people have spun
Yep.
the image around, so it's, back to front and upside down, and, they crop it in, and so you can still recognize it's your image, but there's been
Yeah.
quite an amount of manipulation. What's your approach in that situation?
So again, each photographer will have their own different approach to that. I do have a specific section in my T's and C's that talks about image manipulation and things like that. And so generally I allow clients to do things such as crop, recrop, if they need to flip and stuff, that's kind of okay. But I do draw the line at when people start to sort of do really bad black and white versions or Instagram filters or all of that sort of stuff, because what that does is that's actually altering an original piece of work. And when other people are seeing that work in that state, they can form an opinion that, oh, that's the style and that's the quality of the work that photographer produces. And I don't really want to be associated with that. I want someone who does something else. And so that's why we put that control in place, because we want the original material to be seen, because it's the best representation of our own created work as a photographer.
Like we were talking earlier before we went live, you and I were just having a bit of an offline chat about a few different things. But in terms of, and this is a question that Paul Land has asked on the chat, and Paul is quite keen to know what's sort of the general outcome for people that have said, yep, we've nicked the image, we've stolen it off your website, we've put it online, we've published it. What are you seeing in terms of the breach of copyright? Is it a monetary fine, or is that just an expression or a formal apology? What are we talking about here in terms of outcome?
Look, I think at the end of the day, each case needs to be sort of assessed, individually, because it really boils down to how that image was procured, and then what the image was actually used for. And so, I've had the full spectrum of everything. I've had people that have just reposted stuff on social media and put it up, and some of those bad examples that I've showed before. And generally that's just to make contact with them and say, look, guys, sorry, but, this work is copyrighted, and, you've got to do the same as everyone else has done if you want to use it. And generally that's enough to say, oh, look, okay, I'm sorry, we'll take it down. But then I've had other instances whereby images have found its way to multinational companies and they've used it for full page advertising and stuff. And when that happens, that's the other extreme situation whereby you have to get legal people involved and say, guys, you have a team of solicitors in your office, you know your rights, you violated those under these laws, and this is the course of action. So I think, as a working photographer and maintaining professional relationships with people as well, I think sometimes you just need to look at each one individually. And make an assessment as to how much of an impact it's got, how much intent was there originally. If someone went and actually cut and pasted images off my website, that shows intent. Whereas if they just inadvertently reposted something without permission, it's still bad, but I'll have a word to them first before I sort of go down anything formal. I made an interesting comment a couple of months ago in a talk that I did, was that I've had my social media account now for the best part of 11 years or something like that. And in that time, I've only had 2 instances where someone's actually formally asked me for permission to use an image if they didn't already have the licensing rights to do it. And so that's how rife it is out there in terms of people just thinking that, oh, well, it's okay, we'll share the love. And that's great, but you have to actually do it through appropriate channels.
Part of me, I'm just sort of doing the maths in my head. If that's the amount of people, the very small amount of people that have come to you and said, hey, mate, can we have, access to the imagery? How much money? I'm just thinking about all the dollars that's been lost in terms of revenue. Have you ever sort of done a quick sort of back of mathematics?
No, I don't think of that. But see, the way that I think about it is that, if imagery is out there and then it repopulates and repopulates and repopulates, it gets to what I was saying before about devaluing something. The more and more you see of something out there of your client's work, the more and more you're going to become immune to it, and you're just going to forget it. So I think the whole approach of less is more is still a really strong case for making sure that the curated material out there has strong controls around it. And that I do implore other creative professionals that if they see people using work as well that is not of a proper standard, then they should also, you know, go into bat for their photographer as well and say, hey guys, you're not doing the right thing here. There are people out there obviously that want the exposure and stuff like that. I don't see the gain in that. Architecture is a professional service. It's not a retail product. So we're not a Nike, or we're not selling to the masses or anything like that. So we don't need huge exposure. But I think what we do need is a controlled focus exposure, so that, you know, a lot of people can really lock down on their clientele and the people that they want to surround themselves with and work with.
This is an interesting one. So my mate Linda Pierce, she's at the University of South Australia. She's watching online at the moment, and she has a huge amount of students, and so she looks after the architecture and interior design students at UniSA. Now, look, they use images from a number of different providers through their studies. They pop them into their assignments, and they whack them into their uni studies and all that kind of good stuff. Look, Linda's always very hot to trot on it. She's like, you know, guys, make sure that you reference the images. But what are your thoughts on, you know, supporting the next generation of academic or next generation of architects and interior design students in terms of them using your images?
Yeah, look, again, as I alluded to before, Michael, I briefly touched on a term that says fair use. And fair use allows a lot of those environments to actually use copyright material in terms of, you know, getting information and stuff out there. There's so much more in terms of defining what that is, and it's a very grey area. You can spin a story however you want to make it fit within those, you know, those topics of fair use. But yes, things like education, I'm always getting approached from people to say, look, can we use a particular image for a report that we're doing for a university, or a study that we're doing, or a study grant that we're trying to put in. And so I'm very mindful that, yes, you know, there are some images that can be used for that purpose that, you know, don't need, you know, the tight copyright controls around them. But what that does raise, though, is that they, as individuals, those students have to understand that they're only using that material in that environment. They don't actually have then an ongoing right to use those images outside of that if they start to venture into things like business or commercial purposes. So, you know, if they then wanted to turn around and, you know, start an architectural firm themselves, and they've taken one of my photos to use as their homepage for it, because it was part of their assignment, that's starting to venture into a commercialization.
Yeah, very much. So where there's that line drawn in the sand of commercial gain, I suppose that's where, you know, it sort of needs to end.
Exactly, yeah.
I've got a fascinating one, and one that I've not thought about. David Gray, who's on the chat, put this in, and he talked about the use of drones. I mean, this is an evolving way, especially when we're entering awards now. You've got, you know, multi-res, you've got, you know, major commercial buildings, and to appropriately feature them, you do need drones to, you know, spin around to the 360 externals. I presume the same, irrespective of the technology being used to capture imagery, the laws relate the same, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, you know, a drone is a creation device. You know, it's a still camera, or it's a video camera. So whether you're in the air or on the ground, the person who actually owns that drone and creating that material is the copyright owner of that material. So yeah, it should effectively fall under the same controls, because it is an original content. Actually, one interesting thing that I forgot to mention before around the control of imagery and copyright is that not a lot of people are actually aware that there can be copyrighted material within copyrighted material. And there have been a lot of instances whereby well-known pieces of artwork or other aspects within a photo that, say, for instance, I might take, is actually copyrighted. So again, you know, that needs to be a big awareness for a lot of people, because when you start to use those photos for commercial purposes or advertising or editorial work, the person that owns the copyright within the copyright is still able to put their hand out and say, guys, you're exploiting my rights, and that's something that needs to be front and center in a lot of people's minds as well.
This is a question, and I'll wrap it up very soon. Two more questions, if
no, that's fine.
before we finish
up.
We've got 5 minutes. We could, couldn't we? This is a question from Annalise. Now, Annalise has got a continual pain in her side, and this is a question that it's a really fascinating one. No, true. This is more about people nicking her content. So, in terms of action, so she says to you, look, Scott, what action would you recommend? We see other consultants, other architects, other companies reposting photos from her Instagram account. They hold the licensing for it, and they have continual offenders, habitual people that keep nicking their stuff. What's your best recommended approach in that regard?
Look, I think there's only one approach, but in this day and age where everyone, it gets back to what I alluded to before about that. I truly believe that architecture is not a retail product, and yet I think a lot of people have got this thing in their mind about we've got to share the love. We've got to get our stuff out there for as many people to see. I don't mind if people repost as long as they're putting my name up there and all this sort of stuff. And I look at that and I go, I don't understand it. I don't see what benefit you're getting other than you're paying for their marketing, simply because you've got the potential to get increased followers. And that I don't think that equates back to increased work. So coming back to that question, I would like to think that a lot of the clients that I work with actually have a professional courtesy back to me and say, well, okay, Scott owns the copyright. We've licensed that material. We're both in this together. Anyone else who's pinching this material, me as the architect, I should be saying to them, look, guys, if you want to use it, you should help pay for this material because I did. And then secondly, out of professional courtesy, you need to ask Scott, have you got permission to use that in the first place? Because part of my background work as a photographer is that they might come to me and I'll say, well, guys, no, sorry, look, we can't do that because there's a release date clause or there's a privacy issue around this or something like that. And it's my job to make sure that my own clients, as I said, their brand integrity and their marketing is kept on track through these controls.
I think the main thing really you talk about there is integrity and valuing what you've got as a resource. Exactly. And we find this very often, and I'm actually dealing with a case here in Victoria at the moment with a member, and this sometimes happens with the wonderful members that we look after. We had a member who, out of the kindness of their heart, volunteered to pull together an architectural plan for a potential client, and the client was very demanding and wanted, quite detailed plans drawn up. And then they said they're not proceeding. What happens? 6 months later, you drive past the block of land, there's the house, exactly to the plan. So it's about protecting, your own intellectual property and valuing the integral quality that is inherent in a qualified photographer and a qualified architect. I mean, this is all about protecting the 7 years of study that our members have done, that the intense level of experience in order to get to that stage, and sadly some of those people just don't respect it. And obviously we see today that it is sadly rife breach of intellectual property. So maybe we do need to get a bit more like the US. Maybe we do need to sort of step up our approach and get a bit more litigious.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's necessarily the right thing. I'd actually probably like to take a different approach, as a collective group and look at, say, some of the European countries like Sweden or Switzerland, that it becomes an ingrained aspect to their professional work. I think we all sort of, see that the guys over there, they have this innate design aspect built into them. They appreciate design. They've got a respect for it and the people that are behind it. So I think as a collective whole of creatives, I wouldn't want to actually go down the approach of, okay, here's a cease and desist order, here's another one. I think it's more a case of we can build strength together and weed out the people that really are sort of riding on people's coattails. and sort of, getting that free ride and saying, well, guys, no, that's not right. If the shoe was on the other foot, you'd be the first to scream. This is, you either get on board or you go and find someone else to work with, because, if you have that approach, you're going to attract the same minded people, and it will become a much more, unified group to deal with. And we start to then venture back into that professional service rather than that retail approach of what I sort of seeing out there at the moment with the throwaway society and the next best thing and all that sort of stuff. So it's something we've got to think about. It's been around since 1968, so it's not just today. It's date stamped all the way back in the past. So that's something that everyone's got to think about as well. You can't just pull something out of 20 years ago and think that it's all okay. Let's roll with it. It's still protected. Yeah, I think that's the approach that we probably need to take to this whole thing. Is I'd like to think that my own clients would see someone else using it and go, guys, no, that's not right. It's disrespectful to us. It's disrespectful to Scott. And if you want to be part of this, then ask the right questions and we'll give you the right answers.
Well, look, we have had a lot of questions come through, and I am conscious of time, but apologies. I've tried to get through pretty much all of the questions.
No, that's all right.
If there are any questions to all of our members watching, if there are any questions out there that we haven't answered, Scott, what's the best way to get in touch with you if people want to continue the conversation?
Oh, look, I mean, as I said, I'm not a legal practitioner. So, if there's any sort of curly questions relating to your own specific aspects, then, you probably need to speak to someone. I don't know whether they've got access to through their institute membership to a legal section. I'm not sure. But I mean, yeah, look, feel free. If anyone wants to sort of email me, they can find me through the website at scottburrows.com.au. Pop through an email, and if I can answer it just in a very generalistic term or give some general advice or clarity, I'm happy to do so.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that is it for you, Scott Burrows. Thank you very much for this time that you've spent with us. It was a really, the comments coming through on the chat box, it was not something that kept people asleep. It was fascinating. There was a lot of great content in there. You've done very well. You should be very proud. So just to remind everybody, thank you for joining us today. I do want to say a massive thank you to Scott Burrows. He's been a fantastic on fascinating stories and some beautiful imagery there that obviously people have missed, but hopefully good information. Good information.
Back.
Yeah, exactly. Be kind. But no, a massive thank you to Scott. So don't forget, that is it for today, but I do want to put out a shout out on Thursday. We have another lean in, as always, on Thursday at 12 noon. Join me, because I'm going to be talking to Bronwyn Weir. She's 50% of the Shergold Weir report. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the Building Confidence report. So this is following on from a number of the significant issues we saw with Opal Tower, over the last sort of number of months. So Bronwyn's going to be joining me for an hour. We're going to be doing a really fascinating sort of deep dive and a little bit of behind the scenes exclusive review of the Shergold Weir report. So it's your opportunity to get in touch with Bronwyn, ask her any questions as well. That is it for today. It's been fantastic to have you join me over this period. Thanks again, Scott. And
you're welcome, Michael.
Absolute pleasure having you on board, and we look forward to seeing everybody this coming Thursday when I join with Bronwyn Weir. But until then, stay safe and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Take care. Cheers.
Happy posting. Bye.